Hey, Lucky,
Hello, sir.
how you doing?
Ah, I'm okay. I'm okay. And yourself?
I'm good, bro. I'm very good, thank you. Yeah, so
Right.
welcome. Today that what we're going to look at is a data analysis project specifically around e-commerce.
Right.
So, what I'm basing this on is a WordPress web application or a website for a client of mine who sells health supplements.
Mm,
And the goal of the project is to analyze their sales data. So, and we're talking about tens of thousands of records that we're dealing with. So it really is a real world project, this.
yeah.
And what I've been doing is analyzing or getting the data around what the sales figures have been up until now for the last 3 years, and then forecasting sales for the rest of 2024.
Yeah.
So yeah, just for privacy and that, I'm not going to show the actual company or anything like that. And these figures are
Yeah.
completely made up, but it is based on it is a case study based on a real world project. So
Okay.
just to show you guys how we work with a database. So, and specifically a WordPress database. I'm just going to share my screen. Um,
Currently I'm not exposed to my computer. I hope that will not be a
No,
problem.
that's absolutely fine, because I'm
Okay.
just going to be presenting, so you don't need to share your screen. Just sit back and yeah, and enjoy. That's absolutely fine. There we go. Okay, so what we're looking at here is PHP My Admin, and you will definitely have seen this through working through the course with wherever you've installed it using WAMP or XAMPP or MAMP or whatever.
Yeah.
So WAMP is Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And just for anybody who doesn't know, as an example, there are so the setup is Apache, MySQL, PHP,
Mm,
and there are different variations and flavors on that. It's just a software that you download and install on your computer so that you can create a web server essentially. So
okay.
if you were running a WordPress site on your local computer, you would only do that if you were in development or building a website locally and coding it locally. Obviously, you wouldn't host publicly a website from your computer because your computer is not on all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, getting a hosting subscription means that it's on these warehouses with thousands of servers that are constantly on and available and serving your website. So just to say that Apache MySQL PHP software is downloaded on your local computer for testing and development. So if you've
Okay.
used Apache MySQL and PHP's packages, you will have worked with MySQL, so you can work with it on the command line. But the better and more accessible way is just to use it from the graphical user interface. So
Okay.
what I've got here is a WordPress website database, and in this in this web application, we've got orders tables. So using generally in WordPress, if you're creating an e-commerce website, you're going to use WooCommerce. So that's pretty much the standard. There are others, but I mean, and I don't know the market share, but WooCommerce is definitely the lead in e-commerce functionality, extending a standard WordPress site with e-commerce functionality. So what the WooCommerce plugin does when you install it is it creates a whole set of its own tables, and there are many tables in this. You can see there's 5 pages of tables. So this particular website, there's quite a lot. But
Yeah.
in essence, just to say that the orders are stored within the WooCommerce tables in here. And let's just actually scroll through. Like I said, I'm not showing actually any specific data, but it's purely the structure of the database.
Yeah.
Okay, so as soon as we get to WC, you know that we're dealing with WooCommerce tables. So there's quite a lot of different function tables for functionality. Some of the tables are extra third-party plugins and WooCommerce add-ons. So not all of them are with the standard WooCommerce plugin, but they all are related and working with WooCommerce for the e-commerce functionality. Okay, so within these WooCommerce tables, there are orders. All right, so we've got, I did see it there. Okay, so order item discounts. Okay. All right, so the WooCommerce table is WooCommerce order items. So that is what is literally the list of orders. And you've also got the order item meta. So metadata is data that describes something. So you've got the orders, and the reason for splitting it up into two tables is that so you don't have too much data in a single table, and it makes it a little bit more flexible and easier to work with. So you've got the main information about the orders. So you have like the order ID, the order date, the order amounts, you know, the basic columns. And then the item meta will be the more information about each of those orders. So in order to work with this data, we need to somehow get all of this information down into a CSV file. So a CSV file is a comma-separated value file, and it can be viewed as a table by importing it in Excel, for example. You can import it to an Excel sheet, and then it will present as a table format with all the columns and then each row underneath. So but in working with a Python application, we don't import Excel files. We import just CSVs because that's just the raw data that we need. So the very first step in working with any data and this order data and information that we want to work with is exporting the information contained in these two tables down into a CSV file. So there's two steps here.
Yeah.
The first step is creating a SQL query. And the reason for that, so sure. So the question would be, okay, but why don't we just go to each table and then just download it? You can do it directly from there. So the problem with that is that I want to specify what actual columns I want. I don't want all of the columns from either of the tables. All I want for now is the order date, the order amount, and the customer ID. That's really, the main three columns that I want for now. And those columns exist in separate tables. So I want some way to, in one movement, is to get just the columns that I want and to get it from the two different tables and bring it into one. So that's why we would use a SQL query. Okay. So sure, cool. So we're going to look at our SQL query, but how do we actually go about running that SQL query? Cool. So if you look in PHPMyAdmin, and by the way, there are other database management tools that you can use, but PHPMyAdmin works perfectly fine, and it is quite easy to use. So yeah, here you go. All right. So this is where we can run SQL queries. So going into the SQL tab, gives us the option to run SQL queries. So I have predefined. I've already come up with the SQL script. I just need to get my reference here very quick. Okay. All right, so this is a SQL query, and what this SQL query does is it just extracts the customer ID, the order dates, the order amounts, and the order status. Okay, so that was another important one, was order status. And it will return it to us as a list of records. And then the step 2 of exporting is then once the query is run and given us the option to, well, and shows us all that list of records, then we can manually download it as a CSV. So it's pretty straightforward. All right, so I've pasted my query in here, and then I just click on go. And as you can see, the query is run, and it ran quite quickly, actually. So it's given us a new table, actually, with order ID, order dates, customer ID, order amount, and order status. So that's everything that we wanted. And then you can kind of filter it. Okay, so we've got various types of order status, so including refunded, completed, etc. Okay, so that's quite an interesting thing to think about, because if we want to look at sales data, then we probably don't really want, well, not probably don't, we don't want anything that's been refunded or if an order is in draft status. So that is just something to keep in mind, but it looks like there's a lot of, in this database. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure why that is. But for the purposes of this demonstration, let's just ignore that and just pretend that all the order statuses are complete. So let's not worry too much about that. Okay, cool. So, and then this number of rows is the amount of rows that you want to show at a time. It just would affect performance. So we've just got a small sample range, which is fine. So we can see that we've got order ID, order dates in a good format, customer ID. So if the customer ID is 0, it means that someone logged out as a guest. So you don't, when you purchase something, you don't actually need to create an account in WooCommerce. You can check out without logging in. You just put in you make your payment and you put in your shipping details. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So there we are. Now, what we want to do is go down here to the data set and click on export. And what I want to do, actually, before we go any further, is I want to create a new project. I want to create a new project for my local application. So as you know from before, we can create a Python application on our computers. And the way to set up an initial project is literally just to create a directory in your, wherever it is that you store your project. So you can see I have been working on something, but I'm just going to change directory out of that. And what I've got is a directory called just _ data science. And this is where I'm storing all of my research and developments and that kind of thing for clients and for demo purposes. So I'm going to make a new directory, and I'm going to call it, let's call it webinar. Okay. So you may not be familiar with the Linux terminal, but it definitely is worth getting to know. It's a bit of a learning curve, but I mean, I've been working with it for a couple of years now, and I feel very comfortable with it. And it's up my preferred method often compared to the graphical user interface. So there it is. All right, so I'm press enter, make new directory. And then we can do an ls-la to list our directories. And then we can see we've got webinar demo June. So I'm just going to do that. And you can tab just to autocomplete for you. Okay. Sorry, I just took my headphones out. So on speaker now. All right, good. Okay, so what I've done is I've now created a new directory to put my Python application in. And now I'm going to open up Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open it up in this directory. Okay. So the way we do that from the command line is just type in code. So code is the command for opening up Visual Studio Code. If I just type it like that, it probably will just open up a blank Visual Studio Code instance. But if I put dots, it means open it up and open the directory that we're currently in from the command line here.
All right.
Good. Okay, so it's done it. Let me drag this into view. All right, great. So it is empty. I haven't put any files or anything in it yet. So here we are. We're starting with a blank project. And what I want to do first is I'm going to create a new directory in here, and I'm going to call it data. It's always a good idea as far as possible to separate out all the different parts of an application, even if it's starting out very simply. It just sets the tone for the rest of it, and as we know, it just makes things a lot easier to manage. Okay, so I've got a new empty directory called data. Okay, so let's go back to what we were doing with this. Okay, all right, so back to PHP MyAdmin, working with the database. We ran the SQL query, and now what we want to do is we want to download the results of that SQL query. So we've got a few options here. You don't need to customize anything. The only thing you need to change is from SQL to CSV. Okay, and it does give you a CSV for Excel, but I just choose the normal CSV right at the top. Okay, so it doesn't have any special formatting or anything like that. And so, yeah, just change to CSV and then click on export. Great. So now you can see it's downloading a CSV file. It's just calling it P, and just make sure it's in the correct directory. So webinar demo June, that's my project, and I want it inside my data directory. And I'm just going to call it sales orders, right? Okay, cool. There we go. So we've got a sales orders.csv. And if we open up, we can see there it is now. So we're ready to work with our data. All right. So that was all pretty clear. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is we're going to extract this data and start working with it actually. Okay. Great. All right, so the very first thing when you create a new Python application is to create a virtual environment for your Python application. The reason for that is that it containerizes all the application packages and requirements. So you can either install Python libraries globally, which means that you install it on your computer itself and it's accessible to everyone. And it just increases the load and the gunk, on your computer in general. So the other way of doing it is creating a virtual environment, which is containerized. So it extends to just within your application. And if I create my virtual environment, and any packages or libraries that I install here will only be available within my project as opposed to my whole computer. So you can imagine if you've done 10 or 20 different projects and you've installed all the required libraries globally, it's going to mean that your computer just has everything stored on it, and it's a bit much. So anyway, for cleanliness, it's good to do this. So the process for creating a virtual environment is your Python command. So mine's Python 3 on Linux, and -m, and virtual environment program is venv, and then the last argument is what you want to call your environment, and you can just make it a hidden file, so .env. All right, so we're going to create a virtual environment called .env. As soon as I entered that command, you could see on the left here that it's now programmatically created a new directory called .env. So within this directory, that's where my environment configuration is installed. It contains the libraries. Okay, let's see. Lib. So all the libraries will be stored in the lib folder or lib64 as far as I remember. So let's start installing the packages that we need. So because we're working on a data science project, we are going to need packages, the packages for data science. So let's start installing them. Okay, so the command for installing a package is pip pip, and it's pip install, and we want pandas. So pandas is what helps us, or what enables the functionality for creating data frames. And a data frame is just a kind of table, essentially a table stored in memory. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So then pandas, and then we'll be working with stats models. And stats models is the model that we use to create the predictions based on the historic data. Okay. And then we need matplotlib. So matplotlib is for generating graphs and charts, visual graphs and charts.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I know you've worked with it. Hey, it's been a very big
So much. Yeah,
All right, but that's
a
great.
lot.
But you know what I'm doing here, and which is bad. I'm about to install all of these, and I haven't activated my environment. All right, so I'm going to have to just go back a step. So to activate our environment, source, and source it just means run this file. Okay, so source, and we want to activate our virtual environment. So source.env /bin/activate. So if we go into our env directory on the left and we go into bin, we can see there's a program here that activates. So I'm just putting in the path to that little mini application. What that mini application does is it sets the environment. Okay. All right, great. So now that is here, and we can see that it has been activated because I can see in the parentheses on the left, we've got a .env there. Okay, so that's great news. All right, now let's get back to installing those packages. So pip install pandas, stats models. And yeah, obviously, so if you want to install multiple libraries, you don't have to do them individually. You can just put them with a space. Yeah, cool. And then
Matplotlib.
All right, there we go. Let's see.
It's too cold outside, ne?
Man, it's freezing. I'm up in Durban, and it's like yeah, it's
I
good.
can see by the jersey.
Same with
The
you.
hoodie. Yeah, I know. It's very cold outside, Joe.
All right, cool. So that has run, which is perfect. And actually, the other thing that we need to install is Jupyter Notebook as well. So the reason we need to install Jupyter Notebook is because I want to actually run this in a notebook. So you need to run it in a notebook in order to get the visualization, to get the charts and the graphs. So that's important for that. All right.
Yeah.
So let's go pip install. Let me just double check the command for installing Jupyter Notebook. Okay, so it is pip install notebook. Okay, so notebook is installed, and it means we pretty much have everything we need in order to go ahead. Okay, so the first part of it is, all right, let's actually get this set up. So in order to run a notebook, we just type in the command Jupyter. And it creates a new notebook instance in a browser. Okay, so just to check, yeah, you can see my screen still, and I've got my Jupyter notebook here. You can see that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So what I'm going to do now is firstly just open a new Python, a new notebook, and let's just title that, and we can call it sales data. Okay, great. All right, so now we can run our code. So in an ordinary Python application, we would like create a Python file here, like an app.py, and we could run it from here, but because we want the visualization, we're going to run it in the notebook. So the notebook runs in the browser. All right, okay. So what we've got here is at the top is we're going to import the libraries that we've installed. So importing pandas, stats models, and matplotlib. So what I've done here as well is I've just printed out stats models version just to make sure that we are on the correct version of that package.
Okay.
But it was correct. Okay, cool. So that's that version of that package. All right. So the first thing that we're going to do now is to get that CSV file into our notebook. All right, so we're going to load
Notebook,
data from CSV. And in order to run each cell, you just press shifts and enter together, and then that will run the cell. Okay, so what it's telling me is that okay. It's because I've called it something else. So let's just check. I think I called it sales data. Data sales orders.csv. So let's just change that. All right, cool. So it hasn't returned any errors, which is great. It means that it's loaded up our CSV correctly. And now what we're going to do is, because I want to display the data from the tables in a specific way, it means I need to format them slightly in order to get the dates and the amounts, because that's specifically what I'm looking at right now.
Okay.
Okay, so our data frame, we've got our data frame here, so what we've done here is we've read the CSV into our data frame. Remembering our data frame is essentially a table stored in memory. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're converting the columns to data types. So converting it to a date time and then to a float. So it's like a decimal value. And now we can read using the data frame dot head function. Now we can just see the first five records. And the reason for that is so that we can just check that things look in order in terms of the general structure from a high level perspective. Okay, so what we've got here is our table, and we can see on the far left there's the first column, which doesn't actually have a header. So that's the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That is an index that is added by the data frame. So it's not actually included in the table that we've imported, but it's added there as a unique identifier for that record. So The columns that we've got in here, we've got order ID, we've got order date, we've got the customer ID, remembering that if it's 0, it just means that the customer had not logged in. So there was no ID associated. Then we've got the amount, the order amount, which is a number value, and we've got order status, but we can actually leave that off. We don't need to worry about the order status. Okay, so for this demo purpose, I'm just going to pretend that the order status doesn't actually that all the orders are completed. And what I might actually do, and this is part of the cleaning, right, is I'm going to remove that column. Oh, let's just actually ignore it for now. Okay, good. So all right, so what we want to do next is just to make sure that we're not dealing with any null values, right? So null meaning that it doesn't even have a 0 value. It's just empty, because if we've got null value, and in the next stages, it's actually going to cause an error when we try and represent this data in our graphs. So I'm going to okay, so what this line does, so print means just printing to the screen. So we're taking our data frame and we're checking for any null values and the amount of null values for each column. So fortunately, what we can see here is order ID, order date, customer ID, amount, status, all columns have 0 null values. So that's actually perfect, which means that we can carry on to the next step. So the next step, and this is also something that you'll do when you start out with a brand new, fresh piece of data that you're going to start analyzing in using Python, is a df.describe, okay? And there is a df. All right, so this df.describe basically just gives you information about each of the columns in your data frame. So count is the number of columns, mean is the average value across all of the columns, min is the minimum value in the columns, and then 25% means that 25% of the values are below this, and then 50% means 50% of the values are below this number, then 75% values are below this number, and this is the max amount. And standard deviation, I'm not 100% sure in detail what's the meaning of that, but that's what it is. It's the deviation and variation of values. So obviously,
so it's about the columns that are.
Say again.
So it's all the columns. It's the columns that are numerical, if I'm putting it correctly, because now the columns that have W refunded, it's not there. So meaning it's not numerical.
Yeah, that's actually correct.
So,
okay. That's actually a very good point, and that's interesting. I don't know why it hasn't actually come out. I guess
it doesn't have to be there.
Numeric value. So
yeah, when you do describe, it doesn't have to be there. The order status.
Exactly. It'll describe the numeric values. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
So obviously, for some columns, this is not really going to have any meaning, because an order ID, it doesn't have any meaning beyond just the sequence. It's the index of the order in the table. But when you're talking about order amounts, yeah, sure, that is something more relevant. So the accounts. So sure, that's the amount of amount records. And then the average of orders, that's something meaningful. The minimum is 0. Okay, so that would have been like a canceled order. And then 25% of the orders are all below 42, what in the currency that it's in. Then 50% of them are below 63, 75% are below 106, and the max amount is 18,383. So that's quite a large order. And then the standard deviation, as we described before. Okay, so that gives you just an overview, a snapshot of the data. Okay, so now what we want to do next is we want to actually plot these charts. So I'm going to plot a visual chart of the data as it exists. And then I'm going to plot a second chart with the data as it exists, plus the forecast data, right? So we're using a machine learning model, and it needs to be tuned and tweaked and all of that. But this what we'll see now will give us just a glimpse of how this actually works and how it looks, and it's pretty exciting to look at. Okay, so let's carry on. All right, so we want to get the average of the sales by date. So that's what this is doing here. So sales data, you see we were working with DF as the variable for the data frame. Now we're saving the DF with configuration into sales data. So sales data grouping by order date, and then going by month, and then cross section with order amount. Then the sales data order date is equal to this sales data order date, but it's converted to a time format. Okay, so that's just a conversion over there. So what we're doing in this block here is really just setting up the structure and the formats of the data in order to output it onto a graph. Okay. All right. So this next piece of code, next piece of code is very long as well. So that's why I'm just copying and pasting. I did a preparation for the webinar because
just
type it out
just in time.
while it's live would be a little bit painful. So I'm going to copy this next block. All right. All right, let's see what we've got. Okay. So what we've got here, historic are the monthly sales, and you can see that we've got from October 2020. That's when the data started, and then we've got until April 2024. Okay, that's interesting. I just need to check. What did I miss? Okay, anyway. All right, so there's an error that I've missed with the forecast graph, but so just to see that this is the historic data, and what we're going to do with the next graph is to add a forecast over here for the next few months. Okay, so you can see that it's been quite wild, like the first sales, and we had a peak, you can see in August 2023, around that time, August, September 2023, and then it's come down to a bit of a low again for this year. But it's a very nice, clear visual of the currency amount of sales for a month, and then the dates or the months going underneath over here. So that's quite a clear chart. All right, so what I need to just check now is where I've missed, and what it's saying is that it's the exponential smoothing. So exponential smoothing is a function of stats models. So I need to define that exponential smoothing, and I need to just see where I missed it. All right. I'm not sure, but there was one line of code that I skipped out. But this is it once it's run fully. So we've got our historic sales data, and then now we've got the sales forecast. So the sales forecast is using this stats model library. And the stats model library is running it based on this model that's been defined. So the model is an exponential smoothing model, and we fed it in the sales data and then put configuration in. And this configuration can be changed and edited and updated to make the model more accurate. But for now, for this demo purpose, it's actually doing a perfect job. So this is what it's predicting for the rest of this year. So, okay, it's actually up to March 2025. So there it is. That's the project. And there will be a lot more. There's a lot more that we can do with this data. But for this specific project, I just wanted to output a forecast based on historic data. And then what I'll be doing now is, tuning this model to get accuracy. And what will be so great is actually creating the forecast and the definitions, and then every 3 months going back and seeing what the relation was into reality. And then that's how we actually check, if how good the model is, and to fine tune it accordingly. Okay. Thank you, Lucky, for being here. Is there anything that you would like to ask, or any questions or comments at all?
No, I would say I'll give a comment on the describe function. So describe function, how I usually understand it, if you can just scroll like a little bit.
Okay.
And then how I usually try to understand it is that we're looking at the order amount, and then so basically if maybe we try to visualize the order amount, and then we have the mean and the mean and the max. So I usually try to understand it is just like try to, plot the graphs, and then when like I check the correspondence between the independent and dependent variables on the graph. So, and then I try to check and try to scroll up and then check on the describe, and then check the values there. Maybe on the max I see 18.38, and then it shows me on the graph where the 18,303 is and stuff like that. So that's just like how I try to understand the describe function, because I try to make a research about it. Like, nah, I don't actually quite understand this, but then how can I understand this? And then
Okay.
and then
So the describe won't necessarily be, you don't need to have the describe run in order to plot it. So the describe really we use initially in order to, I think there is another function called info. Let me just, yeah, okay. So info and describe. So let's do. Okay, so you'll run info and describe at the start of any data science, data analysis project, right? And this really, independent of what you're going to do later on, whether you're plotting graphs or exporting or whatever you're doing, this is just for you to initially just get a high level overview of the data. So, and just to make sure that firstly, it is in the format that you expect. And then secondly, if you do need to get a glimpse, like I said, so order ID, there's no benefit for seeing this data really under order ID, because it's just a sequential set of numbers. But in the amounts, this is something that you can definitely work with. Like, you can get information from this. So it's just an overview, and to check the data, and just to give you an overview snapshot of what the data is that you are looking at. in order to carry on with your analysis. So it's the first step in the data cleaning, actually. You
Yeah.
would do this before you clean your data. And the data cleaning meaning that you don't have any null variables or empty cells or anything like that. So this is the information that you can use to get that. These are the functions that you can use to get that information.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, one last thing. I think we can just do a quick recap about what you did. So I can say we started at PHP, where you have your database, right?
Sorry, say that again.
I can I'm saying we can do a little bit of a recap. So what we did was that we started HPHP where we have our database, and then from
Yes,
there, and then we went to SQL to make some queries about like the tables that we need. I mean, columns that we need, features. I
correct.
mean, so,
Yes,
and then from SQL, and then we converted our chosen columns to CSV,
correct. And then
and then
export.
from CSV, yeah, and then from CSV, and then we went to Studio Visual Code, and then imported some libraries,
Yeah, that's
and
exactly it.
then
Yeah, that's exactly it.
yeah,
And
and
then
then from there we installed what is it, Jupyter. Then we opened Jupyter, and then yeah, we started visualizing the data.
exactly. Yeah. So then
All right.
creating a Python project, and then the the libraries that you need for the notebook you install from within your Python project in your virtual environment. Yeah, so it's all essentially in the same project, but running your notebook, you'll run it in a Jupyter notebook environment. That's the only difference. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I've just realized that you can you can also install these libraries using Jupyter. You can just open a
Um,
new yeah, you can just
that's
open a new yeah, you can just open a new notebook and then pip install something. So I just realized that like you can also do that.
where did you install it? Yeah.
Yeah, here you just say pip install something. Yeah, anything. Yeah, pandas, and then it will just install.
Hey, check at that. Yeah, exactly. I've always just done it from the command line, but that's fantastic. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, well
So
done.
usually when I work on a certain project, I just do that. I avoid going to studio because it takes time to reload sometimes on my computer. So I
Mm.
just like open a new window and then yeah,
And
install
and
that.
obviously, if you're working on like a remote notebook, which you don't have the local command line for, then that's how you need to install it. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
it's been great, man.
Good. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you, Lucky. It has been fantastic, a good session, very exciting, really interesting, and this is relevant content for the industry, right? So yeah, I'm very happy.
definitely.
All right, pal. Thanks so much. So we can wrap up there.
All right. Thank you.
Stop sharing. Okay, Lucky. Have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you for joining.
You too. So we're meeting again on Friday.
We've got our meeting on Friday, correct?
Nice. Good job.
All right. See you there.